The scent of jasmine filled the grand marble halls of the Alvara mansion, nestled in the elite hills of Jakarta. Inside, Emma Alvara, heiress to a billion-dollar conglomerate, stood by the massive window, her expression unreadable. Her diamond bracelet shimmered in the afternoon sun, but her heart felt colder than the steel clasp around her wrist. She turned as her assistant entered, clipboard in hand. "Miss Emma, your ex-fiancé, Adrian, just posted engagement photos with the defense minister's daughter." Emma didn't flinch. Instead, she whispered, "Good for him," and walked toward her desk, where an untouched stack of wedding cards sat. She picked one up and dropped it into the trash. Later that evening, Emma found herself in a quieter part of the city. No paparazzi, no glass buildings, just the smell of street food and old books. She walked into a small tea stall tucked between two shuttered shops. The sign read, "Z's Chai and Stories." Inside, a man was sweeping the floor. He looked about her age, early 30s. Simple gray kurta, calm eyes, a faint beard. The kind of man no one notices in a crowd, but Emma had been watching him for a week. "You're Zishan?" she asked, removing her designer sunglasses. He looked up, mildly startled. "Some call me that. Others just say bye. I want to marry you," Emma said plainly. Zishan blinked. "I beg your pardon? I want a nikah. A real one. Next Friday." He stared at her like one might look at a beautiful painting hanging upside down. "Why?" he asked, setting the broom aside. Emma took a deep breath. "Because I need to save face. My ex dumped me for political gain. I want to shock him, and the media. I need someone who has nothing to gain and nothing to lose." Zishan said nothing. The only sound was the whir of a dusty fan overhead. Emma opened her purse and pulled out a check. "Blank. You can write any amount." Zishan didn't look at the check. Instead, he asked, "And after this stunt? You go back to your life. No strings, no questions. Just a contract marriage. We sign the papers, make a few public appearances, and you're free." Zishan exhaled, long and silent. "You don't even know if I'm Muslim." Emma smiled coldly. "You run a tea shop called Chai and Stories, and there's a Qur'an on your shelf next to a tasbih. I'm not an idiot." He almost smiled at that. Almost. That night, Zishan walked back to his small rented room behind the shop. The light flickered above his desk as he sat down and opened an old notebook. It was filled with du'as, verses from the Qur'an, and handwritten reflections. "Ya Allah, guide me in what is best, even if it comes in the form of a test." He closed the notebook and whispered, "She's not just a test. She's a storm." 3 days later, Emma returned, this time dressed modestly in a loose white blouse and beige trousers. Her tone was businesslike. "Have you decided?" Zishan nodded slowly. "I'll do it. But on 3 conditions." "Go on." 1. No touching. 2. No media interviews without consent. 3. You respect my deen, my religion. Even if you don't understand it. Emma raised an eyebrow. "That's all?" "That's everything." She extended her hand. Zishan didn't shake it. Instead, he simply said, "I'll see you on Friday, inshallah." The day of the nikah arrived. It was a modest event, held in a small masjid in an old part of town. Emma wore a simple pastel dress with a headscarf that she didn't know how to tie properly. Zishan wore white. Clean. Crisp. Calm. The imam looked between them. "You both understand this is a sacred covenant before Allah?" Emma nodded, unsure what that truly meant. The nikah was completed with minimal words. Zishan said the ijabokable with a steady voice. Emma repeated what was asked. No grand gestures. No music. Just witnesses, signatures, and silence. Outside the masjid, paparazzi were waiting. Emma gave them a radiant smile, holding Zishan's arm but standing inches away. The cameras flashed. It looked like love. But it wasn't. Not yet. Back in her car, Emma laughed, scrolling through the trending headlines. "Billionaire heiress marries tea seller in stunning twist." From boardroom to biryani, Emma's wild love story. But Zishan didn't laugh. He stared out the window. He looked like a man who had just buried something. That evening, Emma asked, "Why did you agree? You never asked for money." Zishan poured tea into 2 cups. "Because maybe, just maybe, Allah sent you to me for a reason." Emma rolled her eyes. "You think I'm part of some divine plan?" Zishan smiled faintly. "Everything is." She sipped the tea. It was the first time in months she tasted something warm, not just in temperature, but in soul. 3 days had passed since the nikah, and Emma Alvara had returned to her mansion, now with a quiet stranger technically labeled as her husband. The world saw it as a bold, unpredictable move, a billionaire heiress marrying a no-name chai seller. The tabloids called it her rebellious revenge, and Emma let them believe it. But beneath the headlines and the photos, there was an awkward silence between her and Zishan that even the chandeliered ceilings of her mansion couldn't fill. He never touched her. Never looked into her eyes for too long. He treated the staff with gentle respect, prayed 5 times a day in a small corner room she didn't even know existed before, and read from a thick, green book that he always kept close. "Is that the Qur'an?" she finally asked one afternoon, watching him from behind a velvet curtain. Zishan looked up, closed the book gently, and nodded. "Yes." "What does it say?" she asked, not out of curiosity but boredom. "That depends on the heart reading it," he replied. She scoffed. "That sounds vague." Zishan just smiled softly. "Not everything is supposed to be explained. Some things are meant to be experienced." That night, at a gala event hosted by one of Emma's father's business partners, Zishan walked beside her in a borrowed suit. He said little, smiled politely, and answered no questions. But as they sat at their table, Emma overheard whispers. "That's the husband? Really? He looks like her driver. Maybe it's a publicity stunt." She clenched her fists under the table. Later, in the car, she exploded. "Why didn't you say anything? Why do you just sit there and let people insult you?" Zishan looked out the window and said quietly, "Their words only sting if I let them define me." Emma hated that answer. It made her feel small, not because he insulted her, but because he meant it. He wasn't pretending. He wasn't weak. He was immune. "You're either a saint or a fool," she muttered. Zishan replied, "I'm just someone who once had nothing but Allah. That teaches you what strength really is." The days passed, and Emma found herself watching him more than she admitted. He fasted on Mondays and Thursdays. He spent Friday evenings at the masjid. And he never failed to say, Bismillah, before he ate, even if it was just a piece of fruit. One evening, she found him sitting in the garden under the moonlight, whispering to the sky. "Are you praying?" she asked from the patio. He didn't turn around. "I'm asking for guidance." "For me?" she teased. "For both of us," he replied. The next day, her father called. "You've embarrassed the family, Emma," he said through clenched teeth. Emma stood in her office, staring at a portrait of herself from a magazine cover. "You married a nobody. A Muslim nobody. The board is furious. Adrian's engagement was meant to secure our defense contracts. Do you understand what you've done?" Emma looked at the phone and replied coldly, "I married someone who doesn't lie." Her father laughed. "You don't even love him." She paused. "No. But he's the only man who's never tried to buy me." That night, Zishan entered the kitchen and found her sitting on the floor, barefoot, wine glass empty beside her. "You're not supposed to drink," he said gently. "You're not supposed to be here," she replied, not looking at him. He didn't argue. Instead, he picked up the glass and rinsed it out. "Why are you so calm all the time?" she asked bitterly. "Do you never break?" "I broke once," he said quietly. "Years ago. When I lost everything and thought God had abandoned me. But that's when I found him." Emma scoffed. "God is for people who need something to cling to." Zishan turned to her, his voice steady. "And what do you cling to, Emma?" She said nothing. Because she didn't know. The next morning, Emma woke up earlier than usual. She found Zishan outside, facing east, in prayer. His hands were raised, his forehead gently touching the ground. She didn't know why, but it looked peaceful, pure, like he belonged to something bigger, something she couldn't touch. She watched from behind the curtain, a strange tightness in her chest. Later that day, she wandered into his small prayer room. The Qur'an sat on a velvet cloth. She reached out, touched it, and quickly pulled her hand back. It was as if the book carried a weight she wasn't ready for. But then she noticed a small paper tucked inside the cover. Written in bold black ink were the words, "This world is a bridge. Cross it, but do not build upon it." Her fingers lingered on the quote. And for the first time in years, she felt something real. That evening, Emma entered Zishan's room without knocking. "Why did you agree to this marriage?" she asked bluntly. He looked up from his prayer mat. "Because I believed there was something behind your eyes that you couldn't see yet." She sat down across from him. "What if I said, 'I want to know what's in that book you keep reading'?" Zishan didn't smile. He just said, "Then you've already taken your first step." The Qur'an sat open between them. Not in a masjid. Not in a religious classroom. But on the cold marble floor of Emma Alvara's reading lounge, a room once meant for champagne nights and celebrity interviews. Now, it was filled with a thick, unfamiliar silence. And the soft sound of Zishan's voice. "Do they not reflect upon the Qur'an, or are there locks upon their hearts?" He read gently. Emma leaned back, her eyes half-focused. "That's a question?" Zishan nodded. "It is. The Qur'an asks questions more than it gives orders. It wants you to think." Emma exhaled slowly. "And what if I don't have answers?" "You're not supposed to have them," he replied. "You're supposed to start asking." Over the next few days, things began to shift in Emma's life, but not outwardly. Outwardly, she was still the confident CEO, the face of Alvara Holdings, attending board meetings and fashion galas. But inside, something strange had started. Restlessness. Curiosity. And in the quietest moments, a fear she didn't want to admit. What if everything I built was just noise? She began to spend more time in Zishan's presence, sometimes under the excuse of asking about Islam, other times just to hear him speak. He wasn't poetic. He didn't flatter. But his words carried weight. One morning, she walked into the prayer room while he was finishing his far salah. She waited quietly as he gave salam and folded his hands in dua. "Zishan, were you always like this?" she asked after a long pause. "No," he replied simply. "There was a time I was arrogant, angry, selfish." "What changed you?" He looked at her, eyes calm. "Grief. Loss. And the realization that even when the world walks away, Allah stays." Emma didn't speak. But the next morning, she asked him for her own copy of the Qur'an. Meanwhile, the world outside didn't slow down. Her father called again. "Emma, listen. If you walk away from this partnership with the ministry, we could lose half our military contracts." Emma rubbed her temples. "Then lose them." Her father's voice cracked. "You've changed. I'm starting to see things clearly, Dad. Maybe for the first time." He slammed the phone down. That night, Emma and Zishan sat on the balcony. She was barefoot, wearing a simple cotton dress. No makeup. No jewelry. Just herself. "Do you ever feel afraid?" she asked. "Every day," he replied. "But I remind myself that even fear is part of Allah's mercy. It brings us back to Him." She stared into the dark skyline. "I never thought a man like you would end up in my world." Zishan smiled faintly. "Maybe it's not me who entered your world. Maybe you stepped into mine." Emma started waking up early. Not for emails. Not for power yoga. But to sit quietly as Zishan prayed. Sometimes she watched. Sometimes she whispered to herself, unsure if it was prayer or just longing. One morning, he handed her a small card. It had the Shahada written in Arabic and English. "There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah." She held it with trembling fingers. I'm not ready, she whispered. I didn't say you are, Zishan replied. But you will be. When your heart stops fighting the truth it already knows. The change didn't go unnoticed. Her friends mocked her. One of them asked, Why are you suddenly dressing like a nun? Reporters speculated. Is Emma converting to Islam? Even Adrian, her ex, sent a sarcastic message. Didn't know tea comes with a sermon. Be careful, sweetheart. You're losing your brand. She deleted the message. One evening, the doorbell rang. Zishan answered it and found a woman, tall, elegant, and furious. I'm Rachel. Emma's friend. He stepped aside politely. You may wait in the lounge. Emma entered a minute later and froze. Rachel? What are you doing here? Rachel stood up. What am I doing here? What are you doing here? I saw your name on a religious blog. They said you were at a mosque. Emma crossed her arms. And? This isn't you. You wear Chanel, not hijabs. You host after-parties, not read scriptures. What's happening to you? Emma was quiet for a long time. Then she finally said, Maybe I've stopped pretending to be someone I'm not. Rachel's voice softened, but her eyes remained hard. Is it him? Has he brainwashed you? Zishan stood quietly in the corner and spoke for the first time. If I could brainwash someone into believing in God, then he wouldn't be God. Rachel left. Emma cried that night, not because of the confrontation, but because the truth was so loud, she couldn't ignore it anymore. 3 nights later, she stood in front of the prayer mat. Zishan wasn't home. She looked down, her voice shaking. God, if you're real. If you've really been with me all this time, show me something. Anything. She waited. Silence. But in that silence, a warmth. A strange calm. Not fireworks. Not visions. Just peace. The next morning, Zishan found her in the garden, sitting cross-legged with the Qur'an open on her lap. She looked up with red eyes and said only one sentence. I think I'm ready to stop running. Zishan nodded. Then come home. The masjid was quiet. Not the intimidating quiet of a courtroom, but the kind that feels like a mother's embrace. Safe. Still. Waiting. Emma stood near the women's prayer area, her scarf draped loosely over her head. Her heels, now off, sat beside her neatly aligned feet. A few aunties glanced her way but offered no stares, just warm nods, like she belonged more than she realized. She had expected judgment. Instead, she found calm. Zishan sat on the men's side, finishing his prayer. When he emerged, he didn't speak. He just looked at her, eyes asking what she was ready to say. Emma whispered, I don't want to fake anything anymore. He nodded. Then let the truth guide you. That night, they sat on the rooftop terrace of the mansion. The city below glowed like fireflies trapped in glass. But above them, the stars were real, untouched. Emma looked up. All my life I lived for power, perception, and applause. I used to think love was weakness. Faith was blindness. And men like you were background noise. Zishan smiled faintly. And now? She looked at him, voice cracking. Now I feel like I've been the noise, and the silence of your life is what I've always needed. He didn't reply immediately. But when he did, it wasn't with romance. It was with mercy. You're not broken, Emma. You were just distracted. And now, Allah has turned your face toward him. That is the greatest love story. The next day, Emma asked to visit a small orphanage Zishan occasionally donated to. She wore a simple long dress and wrapped her head carefully. No makeup. No perfume. Just intention. The children clung to Zishan like he was their favorite uncle. One little girl ran up to Emma and held her hand. Are you his wife? She asked. Emma smiled nervously. Sort of. Are you Muslim? She paused. Not yet. But I'm learning. The girl grinned. Good. Because Muslims share food. And Uncle always brings us biryani. Everyone laughed. Even Emma. Later, as they left the orphanage, Emma whispered, "I felt clean in there." Zishan replied, "That's what happens when you give without wanting anything back. That's barakah." But not everyone welcomed her transformation. At an elite dinner meeting hosted by Alvara Holdings, Emma walked in wearing a modest abaya and minimal jewelry. Conversations paused. Champagne glasses froze midair. Her father, seated at the head of the table, stood slowly. "You're making a scene," he growled. Emma sat beside him calmly. "I'm making a statement. You're humiliating us. In front of foreign investors." She glanced around the room. "No one here feeds my soul, father. And you're worried about money." He slammed his fist down. "You were supposed to be a legacy." "I still am," she replied. "But not yours. Not anymore." He stormed out of the room. And Emma didn't follow. Later that night, Zishan found her standing by the window, wiping silent tears. "I told myself I didn't need his approval," she said. "But it still hurts." Zishan walked to the bookshelf and picked up a Qur'an. He opened to Surah Al-Ankabut and handed it to her. "Do people think they will be left to say, 'We believe,' and they will not be tested?" She stared at the verse. Then closed the book and whispered, "I'm ready for my test." The next morning, Zishan prepared a simple breakfast: dates, paradhi, and chai. Emma sat across from him in silence. Then, without ceremony, she said, "I want to take my shahada." Zishan froze. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Not because of you. Not for the media. Not to look strong. But because I've finally realized who I am. And who he is." Zishan stood slowly, walked to his shelf, and retrieved a prayer mat. "I'll call the imam," he said gently. "But only if your heart says Allahu Akbar before your tongue does." She smiled. "It already has." Later that evening, in the very masjid where they had once faked their love, Emma stood again, this time not for a performance, but for a promise. Her voice shook as she recited, "I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is his messenger." Tears spilled down her cheeks. Zishan didn't reach out. But his heart made dua louder than words ever could. Afterwards, the imam smiled and handed her a white scarf. "You're not beginning," he said. "You're returning." That night, as they walked home, Zishan finally spoke the words he had held back since the day she asked him to marry her. "When you first came to the tea shop, I thought you were lost." Emma looked at him. "But now I realize, maybe you were the sign I asked Allah for. To show me that even in this broken world, guidance finds who it's meant for." She took his hand, gently, respectfully. And for the first time, he didn't pull away. 3 weeks had passed since Emma took her shahada. But something about her now felt timeless. She smiled less for cameras and more for children. She no longer walked like she owned the world, but like someone grateful to simply be in it. Her voice, once commanding in boardrooms, was now soft in sujud. Even the staff in the mansion noticed the change. She greeted them with, "Assalamu alaikum," ate while sitting on the floor with her hands, and fasted Mondays and Thursdays beside Zishan. Yet for Emma, the most profound change wasn't in how she lived, but in what she now loved. One morning, she woke Zishan up before far. Not with urgency. Just a whisper. "I had a dream. I was in Mecca." Zishan looked up. "Tell me." "I was standing in front of the Kaaba. And I wasn't afraid. I wasn't hiding. I was home." Zishan's eyes softened. "Then maybe it's time to go home." Within 10 days, they boarded a plane to Saudi Arabia, not as business-class tourists, not for luxury, but as pilgrims. Emma had taken lessons on how to perform Umrah. But nothing prepared her for the moment her eyes first caught the Kaaba. She stood frozen, tears pouring. Zishan gently placed a hand near her shoulder, respectful distance, but complete presence. "I used to live for applause," she whispered. "But this silence, this presence, it's the only thing I ever truly wanted." And in that sacred courtyard, under the desert sky, she prayed for the girl she used to be. The one who searched for love in headlines. The one who mistook pain for power. And the one who, somehow, found Allah through a man who never chased her, just waited. Upon returning, Emma made another bold announcement, not through a press conference but through action. She resigned as CEO of Alvara Holdings and donated 40% of her shares to a new foundation, the Noor Initiative, a charity focused on supporting reverts, orphans, and underprivileged women seeking education and independence. Her father called again. This time not in anger, but disbelief. "You're throwing away everything," he said. "No," she replied. "I'm giving it to those who need it more. Maybe for the first time, I'm actually building something real." Zishan, meanwhile, didn't ask for a bigger house, or fame, or recognition. He returned to his tea stall, not because he had to, but because it was his space of sincerity. Emma joined him often, dressed in a simple abaya, pouring chai and listening to stories from customers who didn't recognize her as the woman who once graced magazine covers. One afternoon, a woman whispered, "Are you Emma Alvara?" She smiled and replied, "I used to be." 1 year after their nikah, Zishan invited close friends, a few neighbors, and an imam to their small garden. He stood next to Emma and spoke softly. "When we first stood before witnesses, it was a contract. Today, it is a covenant." Emma added, "We began in shadows, but Allah guided us into light." The imam smiled. "Then let us renew your nikah, this time not as strangers, but as soulmates." They exchanged their vows, this time not bound by need or revenge, but by faith and quiet, unshakable love. That night, Emma sat beside Zishan on their rooftop, just like they had a year ago. "You remember when I asked if you were a saint or a fool?" she said, smiling. He chuckled. "And you thought I was background noise." She leaned on his shoulder gently. "You weren't background noise. You were the adhin in the middle of my chaos." He was quiet for a moment, then asked, "If we had to do it all over again, the fake marriage, the press drama, the tears, would you still knock on my tea shop door?" She laughed softly. "No." He raised an eyebrow. "I would have run to it, the moment I realized I had no peace." A few months later, Emma wrote a letter, not for publishing, not for Instagram, but for herself. She kept it tucked inside the first Qur'an Zishan had given her. It read, "I married him for my ego, but I stayed for my soul. He never tried to save me. He just reminded me who could." Years passed. They never became millionaires. But their tea stall became a corner of light in the city. A place where people came to cry, to question, to rest. They had 2 children, one named Rama, mercy, and the other Hidayah, guidance. And when people asked Emma what changed her life, she would smile and say, "A fake marriage with a real believer." And when they asked Zishan if he ever expected such a twist in his life, he'd say, "No. But when you leave space in your heart for Allah, He fills it in ways you'd never imagine."